Senator from Arkansas.
I'm going to be voting no on this 1,700-page bill. I'm not blind to some of the good parts of the bill. It includes last year's Intelligence Authorization Act, which includes some parts of the bill that I wrote that would counteract Russian activities in the United States and Europe, provisions that were blocked by the Obama administration since they refused to ever get tough on Russia. It increases defense spending, although not to an adequate degree given the threats we face. For the first time in recent years, it recognizes that every dollar we spend on defense doesn't have to be matched by another dollar elsewhere in our federal budget. Now, there are parts of this bill that got dropped that I would have liked to have seen. For instance, blocking federal funding to go into sanctuary cities. You might better call them outlaw cities since they refuse to comply with federal immigration law and turn over illegal immigrants facing deportation to federal authorities. But I want to hone in on one particular provision that shows just how bad this process is. In a 1,700-page bill, they don't hide the good things in the bill, they only hide the bad things. So look to page 735, section 543, where you will find an increase in H-2B visas of almost 79,000, a 120% increase over the normal annual cap of a so-called seasonal visa program for temporary workers that can take up to 9 or 10 months. It's not necessary. It has nothing to do with funding the government. Nothing. It hasn't been vetted. It hasn't gone through the normal legislative process, which would be the Judiciary Committee, where the chairman and the senior Democrat both have written that they oppose this measure. I don't even know how it got in there. I don't know if it's the chairman, the ranking member. They may not know. 1,700 pages, after all. Takes hours to even figure out what it means. It's so complicated in language. But this is what it does. It takes jobs away from American workers and abuses the immigrants that come into this country. In the past 10 years, the Department of Labor has found 800 employers, 800 who have abused 23,000 guest workers. Everything from stealing their wages, demanding bribes for their visas, even sexual abuse. And those are the only the ones that have been caught. And that's because, unlike American workers, these immigrant workers cannot leave their job. If they are fired, they go back to their home country, where they often have huge families who are depending on them for their remittances. Their employers know that, and they take advantage of them. It is a newfangled form of indentured servitude. Some people in this institution complain the way Arab countries treat guest workers from South Asia and Southeast Asia. The conditions in which some of these H-2B workers operate are hardly much better. They live in filth and squalor. They're charged exorbitant fees for their rent, for their housing, and for their food. And the employers largely get away with it because they know that these immigrant workers will not complain. They will not go to the authorities. They will not report it to the Department of Labor because if they do, they go back to their home country. And those are just the immigrant workers. What about the American workers? There are a lot of reasons why unscrupulous American employers favor temporary guest workers. They don't have to pay payroll taxes on them, for instance. They don't have to pay unemployment taxes on them. But the real reason is those guest workers have virtually no leverage to demand higher wages. As I said, they can be sent home because they are tied to a single employer. Americans have more bargaining power. If they can get a better wage down the road, then they'll go down the road. If they get better benefits, they can go to a new job. But those guest workers cannot. So the employers who abuse the H-2B program go to the greatest lengths to avoid hiring an American worker. The program says you have to advertise for the job in advance. And they do, hundreds of miles away, in obscure newspapers that have nothing to do with the employer's local economy. Many employers discourage Americans from applying in the first place. Remember, these are unskilled labor positions. Unskilled. These are not high-tech jobs. Unskilled guest workers. They subject American workers to the most extreme, unreasonable, extraneous tests before they hire them. Tests they do not submit those foreign guest workers to because they can pay them lower wages. And when they finally are forced to hire an American worker, because they face penalties from the Department of Labor if they don't, they try to make the conditions as bad as possible for them so they can fire them and then replace them with a foreigner. A lot of the arguments for this kind of program boils down to this. No American will do that job. That is a lie. It is a lie. There's no job that Americans will not do. There is no industry in America where a majority of workers are not native-born American citizens or first-generation lawful immigrants. Not landscapers, not construction workers, not ski instructors, not lifeguards, not resort workers, not crabmen, not a single one. If the wage is decent and the employer obeys the law, Americans will do the job. And if it's not, then they should pay higher wages. To say anything else is an insult to the work ethic of the American people who make this country run. And we just had an election in which the president distinguished himself more on any single issue than immigration. Y'all realize that, right? Y'all realize that uncontrolled mass migration is upending the politics and the societies all across Europe. You realize that, right? I mean, what is it going to take for the people in Washington, D.C. to realize just how out of touch they are when it comes to protecting the jobs and the wages of American workers? Mr. President, I will vote no, and I will say that today is not the day when Washington realizes just how out of touch they are. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Thank you.